Tatra has built aerodynamic cars years, maybe even decades ahead of its time, becoming well known for their high quality and outstanding design, and even being copied by Porsche, but nowadays you don't hear anything about Tatra. So what happened? To answer that question, we're gonna dive deep into the Tatra history, starting in the year 1850, when the company was founded as Ignaz Schusterler and CE and started the production of horse-drawn vehicles. It was renamed in 1891 to Nesseldorfer Wagenbau Fabrikgesellschaft after the founder Schusterler passed away and Hugo Fischer von Röslerstam took over. Hugo took Walk Smarter Not Harder to the heart, bought the famous Mercedes-Benz for inspiration and produced their first car in 1897 called the President with the help of Hans Ledwinka and Edmund Rumbler. Just 11 years after the first car ever, the Benz motor car. The first truck was made just 1 year later. The company produced many different car and truck models under the NV badge, Nisseldorfer Mark. The first Tatra badge car was produced in 1919, while the company was renamed again to Kopřivnická vozovka in 1921 and finally to Tatra in 1927. The cars produced by Tatra did not only see success in Central but also in Western Europe, thanks to the simplicity and reliability. International prominence was also possible because the cars were affordable. One famous example was the Tatra 11, which was produced from 1923 until 1927. Now that we have all the confusing naming stuff out of the way, let's go back to the early 1900s. The first car, which I already mentioned before, wasn't that impressive compared to other examples, but the company kept building new models like the Type B and the Type S. In 1912, the production was badly hit with a 23-week strike and Hugo Fischer left the company. In 1926, the Tatra 12 came to replace the Tatra 11 and the Tatra 17 was a further development into the middle-class car market. In this time, Tatra also produced many trucks which weren't luxurious but reliable and high quality. Tatra went on to producing luxurious V8 and V12 engine-powered cars in the 1930s like the famous Tatra T77, which went into production in 1934. It is considered to be the first mass-produced aerodynamic car. The design was way ahead of its time. The T87 and T97 were following in its footsteps with aerodynamic design. The T87 was the only one of those three to be produced until 1950 through the Second World War. Czechoslovakia was already invaded in 1938 by Germany, but many Tatras like the T87 were still left in production because the Germans quite liked them. They liked them a bit too much, and a fair amount of high-ranking officers and generals died in the car accidents. The car had 85 horsepower, which isn't much by today's standards, but the V8 engine gave it enough power to reach speeds up to 116 km an hour, which is 100 miles an hour. The T87 was also famous because Jiří Hanzelka and Miroslav Zigmund, two Czechs, set off in 1947 and drove the Tatra 65,000 kilometers, which is 40,000 miles, across Africa and South America, showing how reliable, off-road capable and easy to work on car it really is. The Volkswagen Beetle was also heavily inspired on Tatra's design and the mechanical stuff. So much that if Tatra wouldn't exist, the Volkswagen Beetle would have never been so popular as it was. Maybe it wouldn't have existed at all. Trucks were also a big part of the Tatra company at the time, but the turning point was in the 1930s and 40s, which also marked the decline of Tatra cars production. The trucks were powerful machines, many were used during and after the Second World War. While German occupation, the Germans needed trucks like the T81 and T111. Later these trucks were also used to rebuild Central Europe. After the Second World War, the Tatra factory was nationalized in 1945, almost 3 years before the Communist Party came to power. Production continued and new models like the Tatra 600 Tatraplan came into production, taking inspiration from the American car market. This was around the time when these were said to be built in the Skoda factory. This enabled Tatra to focus on trucks, buses and railway equipment. Due to the dissatisfaction among Communist Party leaders with the poor quality official cars imported from Russia, Tatra was given the permission to produce a luxury car, the Tatra 603. Tatra was obviously state-funded by this point, and these cars were only for high-ranking members of society like politicians. This car was produced over 2 whole decades. Car production slowed down, but trucks were still being produced. In 1956, the T137 and T128, which were later replaced by the T148, which had various improvements like the increased power output and reliability. The production of the T813 began in 1967, overlapping with the production of some previously mentioned trucks. This truck had a tow capacity up to 100 ton. For comparison, the Boeing 737 has a weight of 40 tons, which means this truck could single-handedly tow 2.5 Boeing 737s under its own steam. In 1973, the replacement of the 603 came into production, the T613. Coming into the 80s, the T815 was designed for extreme off-road conditions, becoming a very iconic and well-known Tatra truck in Central Europe, having many configurations and fulfilling many different job purposes. Roadwork, military, transportation, just to name a few. These trucks were produced for a long time, but they had many improvements over the years. The last real Tatra car was released in 1996, the Tatra 700. It was a flop. The car itself wasn't bad, but it couldn't keep up with the Western market. There was a sports car a few years before that, but only 5 were ever produced. It was technically the fastest Czech car at the time though. These two had the nail in the coffin, and Tatra started focusing on truck production only. The Tatra truck saw some success in Germany and India, and a few other places around the world, but they cannot compete against giants like Volvo or Scania. Tatra could have been a huge and successful car company, but due to the Second World War and socialistic regime after that, the car production has met its demise, where the trucks went on to becoming well-respected machines. But Tatra is still pretty small compared to other truck brands. I found a graph which shows how many trucks they have sold in 2015, which was 850, then 1.3k in 2016 and 1.7k in 2017. Tatra has sold 1.3k in 2022. In comparison, Volvo has sold 145,000 in the same year. Tatra is currently showing off the new generation, which will probably launch soon. It's a shame that Tatra ended up on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. We would probably be driving Tatras instead of Volkswagens. Thanks for watching, please like and subscribe in order to support me, and see you next time.